What's up my loves, my name is Paige, this is Paige to the Page, and today we're going to be doing my December wrap up. Hello my darlings, welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking through the 17 books I read in December. This was one of my best months for both Pages and the stack as I really pushed myself to finish my goals, and I will be doing a goals wrap up at some point in the near future, so we'll be able to talk through them more there. But whilst it wasn't the highest rating month, I'm really proud of the things that I did read, because so many of these were just ones I really needed, wanted, had to get to for challenges. So I've left the year feeling really good with what I read. So we'll talk about the stats and then dive into the books. Like I said, in the month of December I read 17 books, which equated to my highest pages read of 6,052 pages. So happy. Meaning my average pages per day was 195 and my average pages per book was 356. The damage was done in the earlier month, so but we'll talk about that in the goals. In terms of page range, I had 0 that were under 100 pages. I had 2 that were in the hundreds page range, 3 in the 200s, 7 in the 300s, 3 in the 400s, 1 in the 500s, and 1 in the 600s. My average rating was a 4.24. Still a really good reading month. In terms of genre, I read 2 contemporary, 10 fantasy, 2 manga, 1 mystery, and 2 non-fiction. In terms of format, I listened to 4 pure audiobooks. I read 2 ebooks and 4 physical books. I didn't listen to any audio and ebook combinations, and I read 7 physical and audio combination reads. In terms of age range, I read 1 middle grade, 3 young adult, 4 new adult, and 9 adult titles. In terms of my rating, I had 1 3.5 star, 8 4 stars, 7 4.5s, and 1 5 star. In terms of series information, I read 8 standalones. I started 3 new series. I had 4 that were continuations in series. I caught up on 1 series and I completed 1 series. My biggest book was The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, which came in at 622 pages, and my smallest book was Thunderhead by Miranda Darling, which came in at 160 pages. My total listening hours for the month was 49. With all of those, let's talk through the books. The first book that I read was Spinner of Dreams by K.A. Reynolds, and this I ended up giving a 4.5. This book haunted me throughout 2024 with putting it on TBRs mentally or fitting for challenges and going yes, and then I never picked it up. So by the time we hit December, I knew that I was determined to read this. One of the reasons I kept procrastinating on it was there was no audiobook for it. So I read it physically and I had a wonderful time with this. Like I said, I gave it a 4.5. There was some element of it that was missing that 5-star spark that The Land of Yesterday had, but I'm not sure what. It might be just I needed to read this when I was still really in my middle grade era, but the way that anxiety was represented in this, the way that we're navigating this world was so interesting, and I think that middle graders to early teens would really appreciate this. It has beautiful illustrations in it, and I really enjoyed how the story all came together as well. Then I'm going to talk about them together because that's what I've been doing, as I usually just read these 2 at the beginning of the month, and that is Soul Eater Volume 6 and 7, both of which I gave 4 stars. The 7th issue, I think maybe it was 6. They blur together when I do it this way, so apologies. But there was a little bit more of a fan service in it, and I was like, but it wasn't playing up to it in the same way of Volume 1 or 2 did, so it was still enjoyable. I'm really intrigued where we're going with these characters, and I'm finding this a very fun series to be able to see where our characters go and how it's all shaping up. The villain in this was very interesting, and I really appreciated how some of the adults were involved in these volumes as well. So I'm curious to continue on. Is this going to go on the back burner because it's no longer for bookish peeps? Potentially. But we'll see. So overall, I'm enjoying this series. It's just not one that I remember to pick up often because I don't have copies of the manga. Then I read The Lost Prince by Julie Kagawa, and this also goes by the Iron Prince when it was republished. I ended up giving this a 3.5. I don't want to talk too much about this as it is a follow-on series from the I Am Fae series. You can count this as book 5 in the I Am Fae series or book 1 in I Am Fae Call of the Forgotten. But But with this, we're following a different protagonist from the other two, and he's a very interesting character to be following, but there was so much teenage angst at the beginning of this while we're setting up his character development that I was just like, haha, okay. So I found that interesting and ended up giving this one a 3.5, but as we got into the story, I really found that I quite liked following this character. As outside of the teenage angsty, he was just a different sort of character, which I found really refreshing to read from. Then I finally finished The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. I started this back in February and I ended up giving this 4 stars. It's one of those that I was really teetering on the edge because I put it down for months and managed to pick it up and continue from where we left off and didn't have any issues following the story from there. It really does a few moments of circling back around, which I really appreciated, and I think it's the perfect book to have paused and come back to because of the way that this narrative is structured. We have these books in this world that are capable of doing different things, and I found that magic really interesting, and whilst we explored it, I would have loved to explore it a little bit more. Completely fine that we didn't, and understanding that this is just in and of itself, but I find the structuring of this to be the most interesting, and I think a lot of people will either really dislike it or really vibe with it. So I ended up having a good time with this and very happy to have read it. Then I finished the Poppy War series by reading The Betting God by R.F. Kuang and gave this 4 stars. I am reluctant to say I'm happy with how this series concluded, but I think it was the right choice in the way that we have followed Rin throughout the Poppy War series. With this being the 3rd, I don't want to go into too many details, but it was hard to read, especially because I was trying to get through so many things, and we do have a lot of different reflections in this, but I found it easier to follow on than the Dragon Republic, but I had left a lot of time between the Poppy War and the Dragon Republic, so I know that I wasn't as invested with the characters when I was reading the Dragon Republic and a little bit more invested reading The Betting God. So I can't believe I did it. The conclusion, I want a couple of friends to talk to me about it because I'm very curious to see how they vibed with it, and it wrapped up everything in a way that I felt very happy with. Next up, I read Bitter Blue by Kirsten Kishore and ended up giving this 4 stars as well. I really enjoyed following on Bitter Blue's character and the way that we progress from the Gracelyn story. I think I did myself a disservice with reading Fire second. I feel like I should have read it first and then read Gracelyn, then Bitter Blue, because in terms of chronological order in the story, that's the way that things progress. But coming back into the Gracelyn sort of realm, I was very happy with how we ended and very curious to see where we continue on with the story. I don't think that I would be happy knowing that this was a conclusion when there's so much more to explore. So I'm really happy that Kirsten Kishore has come back and continuing on this world because I'm really excited to see where she goes with it, and I loved Bitter Blue's character, so very happy to continue following their story and very curious to see how the rest of the series shape up. Next up, I read The Iron Trader by Julie Kagawa, this being the 2nd in the Call of the Forgotten series, and gave this 4 stars. This was much more enjoyable than the first in the sense that whilst it's still angsty, it's not as much, and we're following the protagonist continuing on doing what they need to do, and it felt more structured. It knew where it was going and what we were trying to see from the progression of this trilogy. I definitely had a decent time with this, and it made me excited to read the last in the Call of the Forgotten world, but I am dragging my feet with it. It is one of those series that I'm like, I'm reading it for bookish peeps, and I'm glad that I did manage to read all of the bookish peeps that I needed to, and I'm glad that we left this on a positive note. So then I do want to finish off the last of the series, but I don't think I will then continue on with the trilogy that comes after the Call of the Forgotten, because that was a lot of this series to do in 1 year. But I'm glad that I did, and we ended on a really good note. And I do definitely need to see where we end up with the 3rd book. Next up, I read Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret by Benjamin Stevenson and ended up giving this a 4.5. I was reading this with Alison on a book breaks, buddy read, and reading one chapter a day was a delight. There were some days that I definitely fell behind and then got to play catch up, but these were so short that it was actually nice to be able to do that. I really enjoyed the mystery to it. We've got performance happening with magician, and the twists that happen were very, very intriguing, and I really enjoyed having this set at Katoomba over Christmas, as that's an area that I'm not familiar with, but I know a decent amount of it, and it was very, very fun being at this magic show in Katoomba. And I really enjoyed how Benjamin Stevenson navigated all of these different magic tricks as well. Next up, I read Fry's Ties by Stephen Fry. I ended up giving this 5 stars and absolutely surprised the shit out of myself that I did it, but I really, really enjoyed this. It is following Stephen's tie collection and his reflections on it, whether it be about the tie himself, a little bit of biography to him with the tie, or just a random tidbit. It was such a fun collection of ties and his little narratives to go along with it. I don't think that everyone is going to enjoy this, but I think if you really enjoy Stephen Fry's narration and want to hear a little bit more history on ties, fashion, design, and his little fun anecdote, that this would be a great audiobook to pick up, but also a great visual if you do want to follow along. But they do describe the ties as best they can visually in the audiobook as well. Next up, I read Thunderhead by Miranda Darling and gave this 4 stars. This little novella caught me by surprise with the quotes that just decided to hit me in the feels. I didn't know what to expect going into this. There was a black comedy set in suburbia about one woman's struggle to be free. I disagree. Well, personally, I couldn't find the comedic aspect in it, but I appreciated how it was approached and what we're looking at in this suburban freedom. And it just, oh, some of these quotes just hit me in the feelings. It was really lovely, but it's one of those that just, I went in to read, I didn't know what to expect, and I had a good time reading it. It explores family relationships and dynamics in quite an interesting way, and I'd be very curious to hear a few more opinions on this, especially in terms of the comedy, because I found that a lot of reviews were like, I don't understand how this is comedy. So if someone did find it comedic, I'd appreciate getting in on the know. Next up, I read How to Make a Wish by Ashley Herring Blake and gave this a 4.5 stars. My soul. Ashley Herring Blake, just her writing for me is delightful. We're following Grace, who her mother flips from boyfriend to boyfriend and is an alcoholic, and her relationship with her while trying to get into a music school and complete an audition. That's not the primary focus, but music does play a big part in this. And whilst it didn't hit me in my feelings like Girl Made of Stars, I still think this was a really beautiful story with dealing with toxic parents and the way that parents manipulate their kids, especially when they don't have the most stable sense of self, and how Grace navigates that, but also the way that she treats her friends and her relationships as they develop as well. There was one element that I really wish was explored a little bit more. It's mentioned that there was an event that happened with her ex-boyfriend, and I didn't feel like there was enough comeuppance, shall we say, to him being a fuckwit. But I really appreciated her growing from beyond that relationship, and the relationship that does develop, I really, really loved. Next, I read A Tempest of Tea by Husfer Faisal, and I gave this 4.5. I really, really enjoyed this. I had so much fun. I was very captivated by it and didn't want to put it down. I flew through it and had a lot of fun with it. I really want to continue on with the sequel, and when that comes out next year, and I'm really excited to explore more of this author's writing, because the way that they did their plotting and their characters and their world was just very, very interesting. I'm curious. I have a lot of questions. I'm very excited to continue on, and whilst some of the elements were rather predictable, I didn't dislike that. I was very, very happy for that to be the case, because the payoff for it for me was excellent. So happy to have read this. Absolutely so excited to continue on with the series when it comes out in 2025. We're getting there. I'm not losing my voice at all. Next up, I read An Immense World by Ed Yong and gave this a 4.5 stars. We are following how animals sense the world, and it's a non-fiction about that. It was so fascinating listening to the way of different experiences and how we try to envisage what it would be like to have the senses of another animal but the practicality of that just not being possible. But the fact that we can, in some scientific way, have some form of understanding about them sensing the world and be able to communicate that, just mind-blowing. Absolutely. Blows my mind. Ash and I were having a good chat because I was talking about just different things as I was reading, and then he mentioned a particular tidbit on an animal, and then that came up literally in the next chapter. So it was just a lot of fun to read, which is nice when non-fictions can feel so dry. This was a lot of information, especially trying to take it in a very short period of time, but it was very, very palatable and for the most part pretty accessible. Next up, I read A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland and gave this 4 stars. This was a Selkie retelling and it was interesting. I really enjoyed the relationship dynamics and then also how navigating the relationship between one of our characters and their husband. There was a lot of moments that I really just enjoyed going along with the story and just listening to it, relaxing, and then there would be moments of tension, and it was just a really lovely reading experience. So I definitely think that if you know of Selkies and their mythology, this would be an interesting one to pick up, especially with the sapphic take on it. Then I read Daughters of Chaos by A.S. Webb. This is an arc that comes out in January. I'm so happy that I actually managed to physically read this. It flew by. I had so much fun reading this because it does have a lot of mythology elements into it, the Greek pantheon, but the way that it handles it was just so good. I think that there are so many elements of Greek mythology that we hear the males retold over and over again, and we hear particular character stories always brought to the forefront, but this really is putting a spin on it that I very much appreciate. I also feel like it is very accessible for those that haven't explored the realm of Greek mythology, because it does describe the myths within the story without being like an info dump. It is part of a performance that they're watching. So you know that it's intentional to be able to tell the story, but it just makes it that much more accessible for those that aren't familiar with it. And if you are familiar with it, it's just fun to be able to see this story told in another light. I desperately need the next book in this, because this is the first in a series. I need to know where we're going. There was so much that happens. I just need more. And I am so thankful to have started this series and this be one of my final reads for 2024, because it was such a good note to end on. Because the other one I ended on was Magic for Liars by Sarah Gailey, and ended up also giving this 4.5. This was so interesting. This, I didn't know what to expect going into, and it's a PI going to a magical school and trying to solve a murder. That description of that murder, just whole diggly darn, I was not prepared for that. When I was listening to it, I was just like gasping because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where we were going, what was happening. And then there was a scene, and the description, yep, that was the thing that I listened to. It was really genuinely so fascinating to see Ivy, who was our private investigator, exploring the different dynamics at the school, how everything was happening, and the way that people treated her or didn't treat her, knowing or not knowing if she was magical or not. So interesting. So happy to have read this. Thank you, Cara, for sending this my way. Sarah Gailey is becoming one of my just auto authors. I really, really enjoy everything they put to the front. This hefty stack plus 5 other books, including the 600-page book that I read, was my stack for the month of December, and I am so bloody happy. I am spent like a 10 ton of bricks. So that's it. That is my 2024 reading. I know that I'll still have my year in review and my goals and all of that, but that is wrapping up my months of reading, and I'm so happy to have been able to spend another year talking about this on my channel with you all. It just makes me so excited to look back on such amazing reads that I had, and whilst not many of them were 5 stars, they were so fucking good. Let me know in the comments if you had any surprising reads at the end of the year and how you felt about them all. Was there anything that became a new favourite in December, or were you just floating along, doing your thing, having a wonderful time? Feel free to leave anything you want to let me know in the comments down below, and if you like this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more of this mess, feel free to subscribe. I'll hopefully see you on my next video or over on my Patreon. Bye!